Marco Rubio.
The Republican frontrunner, who can sometimes be coy on specifics, disclosed key components of his policy in an interview with 60 Minutes. The biggest headlines: Trump says he'll slash the corporate tax rate for businesses, and low-income Americans could pay no taxes at all. Here's Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett.
Nobody knows the tax code better than I do. I'm like a student of the tax codes.
Trump told 60 Minutes he built his tax plan around incentives he said will create jobs.
I understand what to do with the tax code to get people working again, and they want to work. They really want to work. But we can't disincentivize people, and that's what we've been doing.
Trump's plan calls for 4 federal income tax rates: 0, 10%, 20%, and 25%, meaning some low-income workers would pay nothing. The current tax code has 7 rates, with the top rate at nearly 40%. The plan also calls for lowering the corporate tax rate from 35% to 15%, something Trump says will encourage U.S. businesses to bring billions of dollars back from overseas. Lastly, Trump would eliminate or phase out many credits and deductions, essentially raising taxes on wealthier taxpayers. Trump practically beamed as he spoke of the reaction he expects.
I think you will be very proud of me, and you'll call me and say, I am proud of you, Donald. I hope.
Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform, a conservative group that encourages candidates to pledge not to raise taxes, received details of Trump's plan and came away impressed.
If you have strong growth, then without raising taxes, you can afford more things. This is a tax bill. Just as when Reagan cut taxes, if we'd grown at the same rate that we did under Reagan's recovery, there'd be 12 million more Americans at work. If there were 12 million more Americans at work paying taxes today, the government would have more money.
Almost every Republican in Congress and presidential candidate has taken that pledge not to raise taxes. Trump has yet to sign on, but nonetheless his plan speaks to Norquist.
This is pro-growth. It is not a net tax increase. It will in fact be a tax cut statically scored and fits comfortably within the parameters.
Major Garrett joins us now from the Trump Tower in New York City. Major, you know, most Republicans would never propose to raise taxes on the wealthy. Is Trump not as conservative as he says he is?
Well, Trump is trying to tell Republicans that there is a populist fervor out there that has to be dealt with, not only rhetorically, but with some policy. And one thing that is part of his tax plan is to increase taxes on something called carried interest. That's what people who are, say, for example, hedge fund managers, that's the rate they pay on interest they hold in their accounts for a year. He would raise those rates. What isn't clear, though, and it's an important part of this story that we're going to get to as we see the underlying details of Trump's plan, if by raising or lowering other rates, in fact, he might also be protecting these very hedge fund managers from a net tax increase. So they may have their taxes raised one place, but another part of Trump's plan have their taxes lowered and net maybe not pay more in taxes. That's one of the specifics of the Trump plan that we don't have yet, and we're going to try to find out later on this morning. But the bottom line is Republicans have resisted this idea of taxing hedge fund managers, taxing the super wealthy. But Trump says, hey, they're not paying their fair share. They don't build anything. They don't just necessarily create jobs. And Republicans ought to tax them, at least to tell people in the middle class, we hear your sense of rage about this inequality, and we're going to do something about it.
Major, what about Democrats? How are they reacting to Trump's proposed tax plan, or what we know of it so far?
Well, what we know of it will likely draw the kinds of responses that Democrats have offered to similar Republican plans already put out on the campaign trail, but that you probably haven't heard about. Jeb Bush has a similar plan. Marco Rubio has a plan that's somewhat similar. So does Rand Paul. They don't generate anywhere near the attention because they're not the front runner and they don't have Trump's otherworldly celebrity status. But what Democrats have said about all those plans, and I suspect they'll say about Trump's, is that this is the same kind of supply-side economic theory that Republicans have trotted out since the early years of the Reagan presidency in the 1980s that create large deficits and aggravate income inequality. What Republicans will counter is, look, you've had a president, Barack Obama, in office for nearly 7 full years. Yes, we came out of the Great Recession, but there's no great economic growth. Economic growth in this country is still anemic, and there has to be something done to generate economic growth and more job creation. Republicans believe there is a space to have that argument that probably wasn't there during the last couple of years of the George W. Bush presidency, and they believe politically this approach to economics, while very familiar to their friends and their foes, will have a better chance this time around.
So, Major, it seems that big economic growth really is the campaign promise here that Trump seems to be putting forward. How realistic is that?
Well, Jeb Bush has also promised 4% economic growth under his tax plan. Republicans are all about a rhetorical argument that there is not enough economic growth in this country. Democrats don't know how to generate it. We do. Put us in power and we'll create economic growth. They believe there is enough dissatisfaction in the public that whether or not that promise can be carried out, can be made real, people are willing enough to listen to it and might be willing to vote for it. This is entirely a political calculation about what people will accept about competing economic theories, because as I said just a minute ago, this is not a new idea. It's not a new concept. We have a long history with the debate and some of the reality of supply-side economics. Republicans believe that the political climate is a bit more receptive to it now than it was, let's say, 6 or 8 years ago. So whether the promise can be fulfilled, no one knows. Why is this being proposed? Because Republicans believe voters are more inclined to listen to it this time than they were previously.
So, Major, switching over to Obamacare, Trump called it a disaster. How does he plan to fix it?
Well, that we have far less specificity about. He talks vaguely about more competition and everyone being covered and the government paying for some of that, but the government also negotiating with a lot more insurance companies and providers of health care. We really don't know how that's going to work. That may mean incentivizing states to have more health care providers. It might mean allowing insurance companies to compete for customers across state lines. It's really not very, very clear. Republicans have, since the beginning of the debate on the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, said they will someday come up with a full-blown alternative to all the things that the Affordable Care Act provides. That hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in the Senate. It hasn't happened in the House. And with the exception of the one Republican who had a plan, Scott Walker, well, he's out of the race. So politically, you can see just how much good it did him to have a fully formed plan to replace Obamacare. Maybe Donald Trump will have one eventually. Right now, we just have a lot of glossy ideas about how to improve what he thinks is wrong with the Affordable Care Act, but no specifics that you can really wrap your arms around.
All right, Major Garrett at Trump Tower, thank you so much.